Chapter 1. The Turning Tide. The foghorn sounded twice while we waited, and each time the gulls answered it, and then there was only the water. I had not known until that gray afternoon how loud the sea could be, and how patient. It came in across the flats with a sound like a long, slow breath. It filled the runnels between the rocks. It climbed the weed and the wet stone, inch by inch, until the black spur that the coastmen called the Maiden's tooth stood smaller and smaller against the tide. High upon it, the lighthouse held its one cold eye to the coming dark. And below, where a man had lately died, the sea closed over the last of the bare rock without hurry and without mark, as though nothing had ever stood there to be taken. Holmes stood beside me at the cliff's edge and said nothing for a long while. He had taken off his hat, and the wind moved his hair, and his gaze followed the rising water as a man follows the hand of a clock he has learned not to trust. On the rock below us, a single bird had kept its place against the gale. A cormorant, black and still, its wings held half open to the air. A small band of brass about its leg caught what little light remained. It watched the sea as we did, and it did not seem to fear it. Twice it turned its head, slow as a weather vane, to regard the two strangers upon the cliff, and twice it looked away again, as though we were of no account beside the business of the water. There is one part of that place I have never managed to set down in any account I have attempted of it, and it was not a thing I saw. It was a sound, or rather, it was the want of one. Twice upon that rock, I watched the keeper call his bird into his hand, and twice the creature came to him across the wind as though it had been spoken to by name. And I heard nothing at all. No call, no word, not a single note. A man grows used to a great many strange things in the company of Sherlock Holmes. I never grew used to obedience with no sound to command it. It troubled me, I think, more than the dead man had. "They have told you that he drowned at dusk," Holmes said at last. He did not turn his head. "A respectable hour. A gentleman takes the evening air. The tide has closed the rock off behind him. His foot fails him on the weed, and the sea attends to the rest. The coroner returns misadventure, or something sadder, and a sister goes home in her black. It is a tidy account, Watson. I have rarely been offered a tidier." "And you do not believe it?" "I believe the sea," he said. "The sea keeps better time than any man alive. My whole difficulty has been to learn which hour it was keeping." I had no answer for him then. I knew only what the world knew, that a member of Parliament, a man whose name had filled the newspapers all that bitter season, had gone down to a lonely light on the Cornish coast and had not come home again, that there was a scandal close behind him, near enough to ruin, and that a great many people found it easy to imagine a drowning man might welcome the water. There had been talk of money owed, and of a question to be asked in the House that he would now never have to answer. I did not believe it of him. But belief, as Holmes was fond of reminding me, is not evidence, and we had as yet not a grain of evidence to set against the comfortable verdict of the coast. I have set down a good many of the cases I shared with Sherlock Holmes, and the public has been generous enough to read them. There are others I have never set down. Some came too near to persons who are still living. Some ended in a manner I could not bring myself to print, while the grief of it was raw in a house that was not my own. This was one of those. I left it in the battered tin box at Charing Cross, among the cases the world was not to have within my lifetime. I take it out now, an old man in a quiet room, because those it might once have injured are beyond injury at last. And because of all our winters, It is the one I have never learned to lay aside. But I am ahead of my story, and Holmes would never have allowed that. He would have bid me go back to the beginning, and to leave nothing out for the sin of seeming small. So I shall. It began, as these things do, with a woman who would not be comforted. Chapter 2. A Sister's Doubt. It was the 3rd week of January, and London lay under the kind of cold that does not snow, but only waits. I had come round to Baker Street to find Holmes restless and without a case, which is to say dangerous to himself and wearing to his friends. He had read the morning's papers down to the shipping notices and let them fall to the floor. He was standing at the window with his hands behind his back when the bell rang below. "A client, Watson," he said, without much hope of it. "A woman in mourning who has come a long way and is now upon the step gathering her courage to ring a second time. There, she has rung it." He turned from the glass with something nearer to interest. "Let us trust she has brought us better than the weather has." Mrs. Hudson showed her up a moment later. She was perhaps 35, in mourning that was new and good, though the gloves she drew off were old and had been mended more than once along the seam. She carried a flat leather case held against her, the kind a man of business keeps his papers in, and she did not set it down even when she took the chair. Holmes bade her be seated, and for a moment he only looked at her, in that manner of his that strangers so often took for rudeness. "You have come up from the country this morning," he said, "and you mean to be home again before dark. You traveled by way of a junction where you waited and grew cold, and you have eaten nothing since you set out. And you have come, I rather think, against the advice of the gentleman who manages your late brother's affairs." Her lips parted. "I have told you none of those things." "No, but you hold your gloves in your hand and not your lap, as a person does who does not mean to stay long. There is the grit of a slow train along the edge of your cuff, and more of it than a single line would leave. So you changed, and waited in the cold for the next. And you carry those papers yourself, when by rights they should be sitting in a solicitor's strong-box. A solicitor gave them up unwillingly, or you took them without his leave. Either way, you have set your own judgment against his, and you have come to me because his judgment was that there was nothing here that could be done." "My name is Cora Selby," she said, when she had recovered a little. "Edmund Vane was my brother. You would have read of him." "I have read what the newspapers chose to print," said Holmes, "which is seldom quite the same thing as what is true. Tell it to me as you would tell it to no one else, Mrs. Selby. Leave nothing out for being painful, and begin wherever you please." She told it plainly, and the plainness of it was the hardest part to hear. Her brother had risen high and risen fast. He had a seat in the House, and the favor of greater men, and a way with him that made friends more quickly than it kept them. In the autumn, a thing had begun to be whispered. There were debts he ought not to have carried, and a sum of public money that had passed through his hands and come out the lighter for it. Nothing had been proven, but a question had been set down to be asked of him in the House, and the mere asking of it would have ruined him, whether he answered or held his tongue. He went down to the coast to be out of the way of it, she said. There is a light on a rock off the Cornish shore, the Maiden's Tooth, and a man named Coyle keeps it. Edmund had taken a fancy to the place years ago for the quiet of it. He went down with his secretary, Mr. Mercer, who has been a better friend to my brother than my brother ever earned. And 4 days later, Mr. Mercer came back to the inn alone, and Edmund was in the sea. I asked her, as gently as I could, who had found him. Coyle, she said, the keeper. At the first grey of the next morning, when the tide had drawn back far enough to let him down to the pool at the foot of the rock. He had seen nothing in the night. The light faces out to sea, you understand, and a man who tends it has his back to the rock the whole night through. She looked at her hands. My brother could swim a little, as a boy swims who was never taught properly, never well, and never against that cold. Holmes had not moved. And the secretary, Mr. Mercer, was he upon the rock or ashore? Ashore. He had taken the boat out to the light with Edmund in the forenoon and come back before the tide closed the rock off. Edmund chose to stay on at the light, as he had done before, to walk the rock in the evening and be alone with his thoughts. That was the last that anyone saw of him living. And the verdict? They held an inquest in the town, and the coroner was very gentle and very sure. He said my brother had gone out upon the rock at dusk, when the sea had cut it off from the keeper's door, and had slipped upon the weed and drowned. That was the kind reading. Her voice did not break, but it went very low. The other reading, the one not a soul would say to my face, was that a ruined man had walked into the water of his own will, and that the slip was a comfort we might be allowed to keep. I have buried my brother under a doubt, Mr. Holmes. I do not mean to leave him there. You believe it was neither, said Holmes, neither his foot nor his own hand. I believe my brother was murdered, and I believe I know the man who wished it. There is a person named Marbury, Walter Marbury, who was once my brother's friend and became his enemy. Edmund ruined him in a matter of business and did not trouble to do it kindly. Marbury swore before witnesses that he would see Edmund answer for it. And now Edmund is dead, and Marbury has sent a wreath. She said the word as though it were a blow, which perhaps it was meant to be. Holmes listened to all of this with his fingertips set together beneath his chin, and he did not stir until she had finished. Hatred is a common thing, Mrs. Selby, he said at last, and a man who is hated does not, on that account alone, die by the hand that hates him. I have known a round dozen men sworn to be killed who died quietly in their beds, and one or two who were killed by the last soul on earth with any reason to wish them harm. Your Mr. Marbury interests me a little. I will not pretend he interests me very much. Then there is nothing, she said, and for the first time something close to despair came into her. That is what they all tell me. Hatred proves nothing. The tide proves nothing. The sea gave him back too late to prove anything at all. They returned his things to me a week ago. His note case was spoiled past reading, and his keys were so eaten with salt I scarcely knew them for his. Small things. I have them here. She laid her hand on the leather case. I went through them the way one goes through a task one cannot bear to finish, and I could not stop counting what was not in them. Holmes lowered his hands. What was not in them? His ring, she said. Our father's ring. A plain signet he had worn since he was a boy. He wore it so many years, the finger had grown about it. It was not upon his hand when they found him, and it was not among the things they sent back. And when I asked, they told me the sea takes such trifles, and that I was not to distress myself with it. For a moment there was no sound in the room at all but the street below. Then Holmes rose and went to the window and looked down into the cold morning, as though the answer to the whole matter might be passing along the pavement underneath. The sea takes a great many things, Mrs. Selby, he said quietly. But a ring worn until the finger has closed about it does not leave a living hand by chance, and the sea does not unpick what a man's own knuckle holds fast. Somebody drew that ring from your brother's finger, or else something happened upon that rock, a great deal stranger than a slip upon the weed. He took up his hat from the table. A drowning man does not first take off his ring. Either it was taken from him, or it left him in a way the coroner never once dreamed of, and I mean to learn which. Leave your brother's things with me. Go home and eat something, and sleep if you are able. You have done him a better service this morning than all his friends in the house. Chapter 3. What the Inquest Recorded. Mrs. Selby had left us a great deal of paper, and Holmes spent the better part of that afternoon and on into the evening among it, while the lamps were lit and the street outside went quiet. He had laid the depositions across the table in the order of the days they spoke of, and beside them, upon a clean sheet, he had set the small ruined things the sea had given back. A note case, swollen and unreadable. A bunch of keys, so crusted with salt that two of them would no longer part from one another. There was a melancholy in the arrangement that I did not care for, and Holmes felt none of it. "Paper is a poor witness, Watson," he said, turning a page with one finger. "It tells you only what a man thought worth the writing down, and it is deaf to all the rest. A deposition will give you the hour a thing was sworn to, and never once the sound the room made while it was sworn. We shall have to make do." The surgeon's evidence was the first that he set before me, reading it aloud, for he wished to know what I made of it. It was a plain account, and a careful one. The cause of death was drowning, and of that there was no doubt at all. There was no mark of violence upon the body that the salt and the rocks could not account for. But there was one line in it that he went back over twice. "Upon the third finger of the left hand," he read, "a band of skin paler and softer than the rest, such as is left by a ring long and habitually worn, the ring itself being absent." He looked up. "There is your father's signet, Watson, written into the record by a man who did not know what he had found. The ring sat on that finger so lately and so long that the skin beneath it had never weathered, and then it was gone." "Read me what he says of the time," said Holmes. I took the page from him. The surgeon had been honest, and his honesty was the most useful thing in the whole document. He could not, he said, fix the hour of death with any confidence. The body had lain in cold sea water for the better part of a day, and cold water and long immersion together undo all the ordinary signs by which a medical man reckons such things. The cold slows the body and holds it, and the sea does the rest. He would say only that the death had occurred within a day of the finding. He would not, upon his oath, say more. "And he is right not to," I said. "I have drawn men from cold water, Holmes, and I would not care to swear to the hour for any one of them. The sea is a great confounder of clocks." Holmes had gone very still. "Say that again." "That the hour cannot be told from the body," I said, "only from the things around it." "Only from the things around it," he repeated softly, and he turned back to the rest of the depositions, as a man might, to see how sturdy those things were. There was a statement from the keeper of the inn upon the shore, a careful man by the sound of him, who had given the gentleman his board for the 4 days. He spoke of a guest who ate almost nothing and slept worse, who walked the cliff at all hours, and who had, in his words, fallen away to half himself in the weeks of his trouble. Mrs. Selby had told us as much in her own way. There was even a tailor's bill among the papers, a small charge for the taking in of 2 coats, and it was not a month old. Holmes set this beside the surgeon's line about the finger and looked at the two of them together for a long moment. "A ring grows loose," he said, "upon a finger that has wasted, A man may wear a thing for 30 years and never feel it stir, and then lose a stone of his weight to worry, and find one morning that it turns upon him. He did not say what followed from that. He only marked the place with his thumb and went on. The rest of the papers built the day itself, hour by sworn hour, and I will set it down as the coroner had it, for it is only fair to see the thing as the town saw it before we take it apart. The secretary, Mr. Mercer, had crossed to the rock with Sir Edmund in the forenoon at the turn of the tide, when the race between the shore and the rock runs slack enough for a small boat to make the passage. They had taken their luncheon with Coyle in the light. In the afternoon, at the next turn, Mr. Mercer had crossed back alone. He swore that Sir Edmund was alive and well when he left him, low in his spirits, but speaking of staying a day or two for the quiet, and meaning to cross at a later tide. After that turn, the race got up again, and the rock was shut off from the shore as surely as if a door had been locked upon it. And so it remained through the evening and the night. Coyle's evidence took up the dark. He had lit his lamp at its appointed time, which a man upon the shore had marked and sworn to, and he had tended it through the night, high in the tower, with his back to the rock below, as the work demands, and with no sight of the pool at its foot. He had not gone to look for his guest, supposing him asleep on his cot, or walking below, for the gentleman had asked to be left to himself. At the first low water of the morning, when the pool at the foot of the rock drew back into the light, Coyle had gone down upon an errand of his own, and found Sir Edmund there in the shallow water, long past any help. From these sworn pieces the coroner had built his account, and it was a sound piece of building. A living man at the afternoon turn, a rock shut off behind him, a keeper who saw nothing, and whose lamp, lit upon the hour, proved that he had been about his proper work. A dead man at dawn, and between the two, only the long dark of the evening and the night, in which a troubled man, alone upon a wet rock, might slip from it or step from it as he chose. Dusk, the coroner had said. He had died at dusk. Everyone was agreed. Holmes laid the last page down and sat back, and for a while he said nothing, and the room was very quiet, and I could hear the small settling sounds of the house and the city far off beyond it. "It is a sound piece of building, Watson," he said at last. "Every beam in it is sworn to. The crossing, the keeper, the lamp lit on the hour, the body at dawn. I can fault none of it." He pressed his fingertips together. "And the whole of it stands upon a single nail that no one has troubled to test. They have each of them told me how he died, and where, and in whose company he was not. Not one of them has told me when. The when is the one thing that no man among them could swear to. The surgeon could not read it from the body. The coroner took it from the tide instead, and called the reading a fact." He rose and went to the window, and the lamplight showed me his face turned hard and intent. "A man may die at the hour we are told he died," he said, "or he may die at another hour entirely, and be left upon the stones to keep an appointment with the tide that was made for him. I cannot learn which from this paper. The paper is deaf upon the very point. We must go down to the rock, Watson, and hear what the place itself has to say. There is always a sound a thing makes. We have only not yet listened for it." Chapter 4. The Road to the Maiden's Tooth. We went down into the west the next morning but one, and it was Cobb who carried us to the station. He had his growler waiting at the curb before I had finished my coffee, and he handed up our bags with the air of a man who has news and means to be paid for it in attention rather than coin. "I done what you asked, Mr. Holmes," he said when we were moving. about this Marbury, and there's not much sport in it if you want the truth. The man's been about town loud as a brass band these 3 weeks. Dines at his club Tuesdays and Fridays, regular as the post. Stood up at a public dinner the very night your gentleman went into the sea and gave a speech on the wickedness of him, with half the city to hear it. If Marbury drowned anybody in Cornwall, Mr. Holmes, he done it by post." Holmes smiled at that. A man who stands on his feet before the city to curse his enemy is rarely the man who put that enemy in the ground, Cobb. Loud hatred is a kind of alibi. It is the quiet sort I have learned to watch. He looked out at the wet streets going by. Keep an ear to him all the same. A speech is easily made by a man who knows he has nothing to fear from the asking. At Paddington there was a surprise waiting for us, in the shape of a young woman in a plain dark coat who came straight to Holmes upon the platform and gave her name as though she had rehearsed it the whole way there. "Constable Finch, sir. Agatha Finch. The Yard has sent me down with you, by Inspector Hale's leave, to see the matter through and to report what comes of it." She had a notebook already in her hand. "I am to keep out of your way and to miss nothing. Those were my orders, near enough to the word." I confess I looked at her twice, for it was not the sort of escort the Yard commonly provided, and I dare say my face said as much. Holmes, who took the measure of people by what they could do and never by what surprised him, only inclined his head. "Then we shall be glad of you, Constable," he said. "You may begin by telling me what you have already noticed, for you have plainly been given the case and plainly formed an opinion of it, and are plainly burning to set it before someone." She colored, but she did not deny it. "It is the staying, sir," she said. "He told the keeper he meant to stop a day or two for the quiet. A man who means to walk into the sea that same evening does not first make plans for the morning. And he had sent his man down to the inn for clean linen and his letters. You do not send for clean linen on the last day of your life." She stopped, as if she had gone too far. "It is only that the suicide does not sit right with me. I cannot prove that it does not, but it does not sit right." "That is well seen, Constable," said Holmes, and she looked as though he had pinned a medal to her coat. "Feeling does not hang a man, but it is very often the first thing in the room to know the truth, and a wise officer does not despise it. You are right that the suicide is a coat that does not fit. Only mark the danger in it. The man who killed your gentleman, if a man did, wanted that coat to fit. He chose a place and an hour where despair would explain the whole of it, and where no one need go looking for a hand. We are not to take the easy reading, neither are we to take the comfortable doubt. We are to find what the rock knows, and the rock, I am told, holds no opinions at all." The journey was a long one, and the country changed under us as we went, the brick giving way to stone, and the stone at last to the bare moor and the smell of the sea. We came down to the coast as the short day was failing, and hired a trap for the last few miles, and I do not think I shall forget my first sense of the place as long as I live. It was a thing of sound before it was ever a thing of sight. We heard the village of Porthcombe before we saw it. There was the long, low call of a foghorn out in the dimming water, answered by nothing, and beneath it the hiss and draw of the sea upon shingle, and the creak and knock of boats riding at their moorings, and the thin crying of gulls settling for the night. The wind came off the water with the salt in it, and a colder thing besides, and it carried the iron smell of weed and the tar of the nets drying along the harbour wall. When we came round the shoulder of the cliff and the village opened below us, the lamps were being lit in the cottages, one and then another, and out past the last black headland, alone upon its rock in the dying light, the lighthouse showed its first pale glance across the sea. We found the keeper himself upon the quay, which I had not thought to do so soon. A relief man had charge of the light, while the inquest kept Coyle within reach of the town, and he had come down at the turn of the day to see to his boat, as a man will see to the one thing that is wholly his own. He was a square, slow-moving fellow of perhaps 60, burned and creased by 60 years of that weather, with pale eyes that did not much care for the look of 3 strangers walking down his quay. Holmes gave him good evening, and his name, and his business, all very plainly, and Coyle heard him to the end without a word, and then turned his head and spat into the harbour, which I took to be his whole opinion of gentlemen who come from London to trouble the dead. "There's nothing on that rock for you," he said at last. "He slipped. The sea took him. I've said it to the crowner, and I'll say it to you, and the saying of it again won't make it any different." "I am quite sure it will not," said Holmes pleasantly. "I have not come to make it different. I have come to listen to it." It was then that I grew aware of the bird. It stood upon a mooring post a little way off, black against the last of the light, and so still that I had taken it for a part of the post itself. A cormorant, with its wings held a little open in the way that they have, and a small band of brass about one leg that caught the lamplight from the cottages. It was watching us, or watching Coyle, with one unblinking eye. The keeper saw where my look had gone, and something in that hard face eased for the first time. "That's only Jack," he said. "He'll not trouble you." And then Coyle did a curious thing. He put 2 fingers to his lips in the manner of a man about to whistle up a dog. I waited for the note of it. There was the foghorn out in the dark, and the water on the shingle, and the wind, and the small sounds of the harbour going to its rest. But from the keeper there came nothing at all that I could hear. The bird left the post upon the instant. It crossed the 12 feet between them in a single low beat of its wings, and settled upon Coyle's wrist as softly as a glove, and folded itself, and was still. I looked at Holmes. He was watching the keeper's hand with an attention I knew very well, the attention he gave to a thing he did not yet understand, and would not rest until he did. "Mr. Coyle," he said quietly, "how did you call him just now?" The keeper looked at him, and the wariness came back into the pale eyes, slow and deep. "I whistled him," he said. "I heard no whistle." "No," said Coyle, "you wouldn't have." And he would say no more than that. The bird sat upon his wrist in the gathering dark and watched us with its one bright eye, and out in the sea the foghorn called again and was answered, as before, by nothing at all. Chapter 5. The Keeper and His Bird. We crossed to the rock the next forenoon at the turn of the tide, for Coyle would take us at no other hour, and made no apology for it. "You go at the slack, or you don't go," he said as he handed Finch down into the boat. "The race between here and the tooth would have the 4 of us on the bottom inside a minute, any time but the turn. She runs herself out twice a day and lies quiet a little while, and that is your road across. Miss it, and you wait." He was as good as his word about the road. For a little while, the water between the shore and the rock lay almost still, a heaving gray calm with the menace gone out of it, and we pulled across in the quiet of it with the gulls wheeling and complaining overhead. But I marked the line where the calm ended, a churned and hurrying seam of water off to seaward, and I understood that the sea here kept its own strict timetable and let men pass across only when it chose. The Maiden's tooth rose sheer out of the water, a black fang crowned by the white tower of the light, and at its foot, where the tide had drawn back, lay a wide rock pool, clear and very still, with the weeds swaying slow in it. It was a desolate place, and a beautiful one, and the loneliest I have ever stood in. There was no sound there but the sea and the wind and the crying of the birds, and now and then the great voice of the foghorn when the relief man set it going, rolling out across the empty water. The bird-jack was there before us, as though he had flown across while we labored at the oars, and he stood upon a shelf of rock above the pool and watched us land. Coyle made the boat fast and went to him, and the hardness went out of the keeper again, the way it did only ever for the bird. Holmes watched the two of them with the keen, patient interest he might have given to a rare reaction in his own retorts. "He is a fishing bird, your Jack," he said. "I have read that they were kept for it once here in England, that a king had his own master of cormorants, and the birds dived to a ring set about the neck and brought their catch up to the boat. A pretty piece of old cunning." Coyle looked at him with something near to surprise, as a man does when a stranger turns out to know his trade. "Aye, they will fish if you raise them to it from the egg, as I raised him." He ran a thick finger down the bird's wet back. "But he fishes to his own clock, mind, not to mine. He'll only put his head under at the turn, same as we crossed just now. When the race runs, he'll not dive for God nor herring. He sits up here and dries his wings and waits. It's the way of them. A cormorant's no fool. He'll not fight the tide for his dinner when the tide always wins. He takes his fish at the slack, morning and evening, and roosts when the light fails. You could set the hour by him." "You could set the hour by him," Holmes repeated, and he said it lightly, as a man repeats a phrase that has pleased his ear. And he asked the keeper 3 more questions about the bird, the depth it would go to, and the manner of its feeding, all in the tone of an idle gentleman taking the air. I had known him too many years to be deceived by the tone. He was gathering and storing and saying nothing whatever of what he stored. There was one habit of the bird's that the keeper offered without the asking, for it plainly pleased him to tell it. "He's a magpie as well as a fisher, is Jack," Coyle said. "He'll bring me up more than fish. Anything that shines, he fancies it, and down he goes and fetches it, and carries it here to his shelf, and sits on it, proud as a hen, and won't give it over till I've paid him his herring. Glass, mostly. A bit of bottle the sea has rolled smooth. But I have had stranger of him." He reached up to the shelf and showed us, in the cup of his hard hand, a part of the bird's small hoard, what little of it would sit there at once. 3 or 4 pieces of sea glass, green and white, a bent spoon gone black with the salt, a halfpenny, and a brass button, and a twist of wire. The poor, bright treasure of a creature that knew the worth of nothing and the shine of everything. It was Finch who asked about the calling, for it had been on her mind since the key, as it had been on mine. "Mr. Coyle," she said, "how do you whistle him when there is no whistle to be heard? I have been trying to puzzle it out, and I cannot." The keeper very nearly smiled. He felt in his waistcoat and brought out a small thing of bone and brass, no longer than my thumb, with a little screw at one end of it, and he set it to his lips, and I saw his cheeks fill. Jack's head came round at once, and his eye fixed upon the keeper. But of the note itself I caught nothing. Only perhaps the very ghost of a thinness in the air, gone before I could be sure I had heard it. I understood then that what I had taken that first evening on the quay for a whistle made with the keeper's own lips had been this small thing, held between his two fingers and set against them. "My father had it for the dogs," Coyle said, turning it in his fingers. "It calls so high that the wind takes it, and most ears along with the wind. The young can hear it, some of them, if it's close and the day is still. Not me, not these 40 years, but the dog hears it, and the bird hears it, plain as a bell, however it blows." He put it away. "There's no sorcery in it, whatever the village likes to say of him and me. It is only a whistle pitched past the most of us." Holmes asked to see the little thing, and turned it over once and gave it back. And I saw that some small door had opened in his mind, though he had closed it again before I could look through. We did not stay long upon the rock, for the slack does not hold, and Coyle had begun to watch the seam of racing water the way a man watches a pot. But before we took again to the boat, Finch stood a moment looking up at the bird upon its shelf, with the dead man's pool lying clear and quiet below it, and I saw her give a small shiver that was not all of it the cold. "It is an uncanny thing, sir," she said to Holmes, low, while the keeper was at the boat. "A bird that fishes to the clock, and comes to a whistle out of the silence, and carries off whatever shines. I keep coming back to it, a creature trained so close as that, trained to dive, and to fetch, and to mind a man's hand." She hesitated. "Could a bird be made to kill, Mr. Holmes? To put a man off a wet rock, or foul him in the water? I have heard stranger things sworn to in a court of law." Holmes did not laugh at her, which I believe she had half dreaded. He looked at the bird for a long moment, and at the still pool beneath it, and at the line of the hurrying water beyond. "No, Constable," he said at last. "I do not think a bird was made to kill him. A trained creature is a clumsy assassin, and the sea is a clumsier one still, and clever murder is seldom done by clumsy means. But you are nearer the mark than you know, and in a way you do not yet see." He seemed to weigh that ghost of a whistle in his memory once more. "That bird kept the very same hours upon this rock the day your gentleman died as it keeps today. It fished the same slack water. It dried its wings upon that same shelf, and it carried up to that shelf whatever the sea chose to give it. It saw what was done here, Constable, in the only fashion that a bird can see a thing." He stepped down into the boat, and the relief man's foghorn went out across the water and came back to us as nothing. "A bird was not made to kill him, but a bird may yet be made to tell the truth of it. We have only to learn its language." Chapter 6. Salt in 2 layers. Holmes spent that day, and the better part of the next slack tide besides, upon his knees on the wet rock. He had brought his glass and a little rule and a notebook, and he went over the ground about the pool as a man reads a page he means never to forget, in lines, missing nothing. I had seen him do the like in a London garden and on an Alpine pass, but never in a place that fought him so. The wind would not let his notebook lie open. The spray came over the rock and wetted what he wrote. And all the while the sea broke and dragged at the foot of the rock, and the gulls turned crying over the tower, and the bird Jack sat upon his shelf above us and watched the gentleman from London crawl about the rock that the bird knew better than any living soul. The pool itself had little left to tell. The sea had been in and out of it a dozen times since the dead man was carried up from it, and had taken its evidence away, as the sea does. Holmes knelt at its lip a long while all the same, looking down into the clear water and the slow weed, as though he might make it give the dead man back. "He was found just here," he said, "face down in not 3 feet of water, with the band white upon his finger where the ring had been. A man may drown in 3 feet of water, Watson, if he is put into it and held, or if he falls and cannot rise. But the ring troubles me on this rock as it troubled me in Baker Street. This pool washed out his pockets and spoiled his keys past knowing, and yet it could not so much as stir a ring that 30 years had not stirred. The ring is gone, and the sea alone is blamed for it. The sea is blamed for a great deal it never did." It was higher up that the rock began to speak to him. He worked his way from the pool toward the foot of the tower and stopped where the bare stone gave way to a crust of dried salt, white and brittle, that crackled under his hand. "Here is the sea's own writing, Constable," he said to Finch, who had crouched beside him to watch. "Mark how the salt lies, not in one skin, but in 2. A lower layer, old and grey and hard as enamel, laid down over many tides, and over it a second, newer and finer and whiter, that only the last few days have left, and that no rain has yet washed away. Where the 2 layers meet, a man may read the weather. I can tell you that it has not rained upon this rock since the night your gentleman died, and that the sea has lain quiet at the turns, quiet enough for a small boat and a small bird to go about their business. The rock keeps a fuller log than the keeper does." When the slack failed and Coyle took us back, Holmes asked to see the man's log of the light, and the keeper brought it to the inn that evening without a word, and laid it on the table between us, like a man laying down a hand of cards he is sure of. It was a humbling thing to sit and read. Night upon night upon night, in a cramped and careful hand, the same few facts set down. The hour the lamp was lit, the hour it was trimmed, the state of the wick, the run of the weather, the sails that passed. Years of it, a whole life of it, given over to keeping one small light burning upon a rock so that other men's lives should not be lost in the dark. For the night that mattered, the entry was as plain as all the rest, the lamp lit at its proper hour to the very minute. And Holmes had laid beside it the sworn word of a boatman of the shore, a man named Tregarth, who had marked the light go up that evening as he marked it every evening by the church clock at his back, and would swear before any court that it had not been a minute early nor a minute late. "You see what this is, Watson," Holmes said quietly and closed the log. "This is the keeper's innocence, written in his own hand and witnessed from the beach. At the very hour the coroner says Sir Edmund died, this man stood at the top of his tower with a flame in his 2 hands and a witness on the shore below. He could no more have been down at that pool than I could. Whatever was done upon that rock, Coyle did not do it. I came near to suspecting him, I will own to you. The lonely man, the strange bird, the whispers of the village. It would have made the easy reading. It is not the true one." "Then who, sir?" said Finch. She had her notebook open. "If it was not the keeper, and it was not the dead man's own hand, then there were but 3 souls on that rock the whole of that day. The keeper, the gentleman, and the gentleman's own man, Mr. Mercer. And Mr. Mercer was home across the water hours before the end of it." "So he has sworn," said Holmes, "and so I make no doubt it will appear. He is a most devoted servant by every account that I have heard, and a devoted servant is the very last man in England a sensible person wishes to suspect." He did not say it as a man closing a door. He said it as a man who has just noticed that a door he had believed shut is standing the smallest crack ajar. We might have left the matter there for the night, But Holmes went out once more before the dark came down, alone, back along the cliff to where he could look across at the rock. I went with him. He stood a long while with his glass to his eye, studying the foot of the tower in the last of the light, and then he lowered the glass, and his face had changed. "There is a thing I marked this afternoon and could not account for," he said. "And now, in this slant of light, I can. You recall the crust of salt below the tower where I read you the weather. Above it, higher than the sea has reached these 3 weeks, in the lee of the rock where a man might stand out of the wind, the crust is broken. Freshly broken, Watson. Ground and crushed under a weight, in 2 clean marks, the white salt cracked clean away to show the dark stone beneath. And the cracks themselves are already silvered over with a newer, finer salt, which is to say, it was done since the last dry spell began. Which is to say, it was done upon the day Sir Edmund died, or near it. Someone stood there, above the wash, where nothing comes to wash it away. And by the lie of the marks, Watson, by the way that they point, whoever stood there stood facing the pool below and looking down into it." "Watching what, sir?" said Finch very low. She had come out after us. "That," said Holmes, "I do not yet know. But I know this much, and it is enough to keep me from my dinner. The whole of the town's account, and the coroner's, and the kindly verdict that the dead man's sister came to me to overthrow, every part of it rests upon his having been alone. A troubled man, alone upon his rock, who slipped or who stepped in the dark and the quiet, with no living eye upon him." He turned back toward the lamps of the inn, and the foghorn called once behind us out of the gathering dark, and the cold of the sea came in after it. But someone stood above that pool upon the day he died, and faced it, and watched. And a man who is truly alone, Watson, does not have a watcher. Chapter 7. Mr. Mercer's Account. We found Mr. Mercer at the inn that night, in a small upstairs parlour the landlord had given over to him, and I will say at once that he was not at all the man I had prepared myself to dislike. He was a slight, fair man of perhaps 40, very neatly kept, with the still, careful manner of one who has spent his life making himself useful to a greater man, and has learned to take up little room in a room. He rose when we came in, and gave us each his hand, and when he heard that I was a medical man, he asked me, very low, whether it was true what they said, that his master could have felt nothing at the end. I told him it was very likely true. He thanked me as though I had given him something of great price. Holmes was gentleness itself with him, which I had learned to read as a kind of warning, though Mr. Mercer could not have known it. He asked him very quietly to tell the whole of that last day in his own time, and to leave nothing out. Mercer told it well and simply, and with a grief so plainly held in check that it was harder to sit through than weeping would have been. They had come down to the coast, he said, a week before the end, because his master could no longer bear the town. The thing that was coming against him in the house had taken the heart clean out of him. He ate nothing. He slept worse. He would walk the cliff half the night. Mercer had come because his master had asked him to, and because there was no one else who would. On the last morning, Sir Edmund had wished to go out to the rock. He had taken a strange fancy to the keeper and his bird in the few days they had been there, and the quiet of the place seemed to ease him. They had crossed at the forenoon turn, the two of them, and Coyle had given them their dinner in the light, and his master had been, Mercer said, almost easy for an hour, almost himself again. Holmes asked him one or two small things in his mild way, whether they had gone down to the pool at all that day. Mr. Mercer said that they had. His master had loved to stand on the rock above it and watch the bird go down for its fish at the turn, and they had stood there together that very forenoon, the three of them with Coyle, watching Jack work the slack water below. It was the last happy half-hour his master had, he thought. He was glad, at the least, of that. "And then?" said Holmes. "And then it was time for me to go back," said Mercer. And here, for the first time, his voice was not quite steady. There was the next tide to think of, and his letters to send, and his linen to see to at the inn. He would not come back with me. He said he would stay the night with Coyle, for the peace of it, and cross over in the morning. I did not like to leave him there. I have asked myself 100 times since why I did not stay, or why I did not make him come away. But a man does not order his master about, Mr. Holmes, however dearly he may love him. So I took the boat back at the afternoon turn, and I left him upon the rock, alive, and standing on the landing to see me off. And that is the last I saw of him in this world. Holmes let the silence sit a moment before he spoke again, and the sea was loud in it. "You crossed back at the turn," he said, "because the turn is the only safe hour to cross. The race would not let you go before it, nor after." That is so. And after that hour, no boat could have come to the rock, nor left it, until the next turn, which was past midnight and dark, and a wild tide running. "No boat could," said Mercer. "Coyle will tell you the same. The tooth was shut off as tight as a strong room from the moment I pulled clear until the morning they found him. That is the cruelty of the thing. There was no one near him. No one could have come near him. He was alone with the sea because I had left him alone with it." Holmes inclined his head as though he were satisfied. But I, who knew him, saw that he was not satisfied at all. And I saw, too, the thing that he did not say. For the whole of Mr. Mercer's grief and the whole of his comfort rested upon the 1 hour the coroner had named for the death. And that hour was the very thing my friend had told me in Baker Street, that no man living could swear to. If Sir Edmund had died at dusk, alone, then Mr. Mercer was the unhappiest of innocent men. If he had died at some other hour, the whole shape of the thing changed about. But Holmes said none of this. He only thanked Mr. Mercer for his patience, and asked, almost as an afterthought, whether he might look through his master's papers. They lay in a dispatch case, much like the one his sister had carried to us, and Mr. Mercer gave them up at once, and even helped us, holding the lamp and naming the hands on the letters, with the patience of a man who had ordered his master's affairs for years and saw no reason to stop ordering them now. There was a great deal in the case that told the sad story Mrs. Selby had already told us. Demands for money in several different hands. A draft of a speech of defense that Sir Edmund had never lived to give. A card of admission to the house. The whole litter of a public man going down. I looked at it, and I confess I felt the pity of it keenly, that a life of such promise should come to an end in such a tangle, alone, on a rock, in the cold. It was among the last of the papers that Holmes found the thing he kept. It was a small card, no bigger than a visiting card, of good, stiff stock and very plain. There was no name upon it, and no address, and no word of any kind. There was only, pressed deep into the center of it, the figure of a little bell. Holmes turned it to the light, and turned it back, and held it out to Mr. Mercer. "Do you know what this is?" Mr. Mercer looked at it, and a small frown crossed his careful face. "I have seen it," he said slowly, "once or twice these last weeks. It came with no letter that I ever saw. I took it for some tradesman's fancy, or a card of one of his clubs." He hesitated. "There was a person, Mr. Holmes, in the worst of his trouble, of whom my master spoke now and then. A friend, he called him, who could make difficulties disappear for those who were able to pay his price. It was this friend, I believe, who put it into his head to come down here, to be out of sight while the matter was settled. My master would never give me the name. He would only say it was a name better not spoken, and that I was not to trouble myself over it. I did not like it, but it was not my place to ask." He gave the card back. I had forgotten it until now. Holmes looked at the little bell a long moment, and then, instead of returning it to the case, he buttoned it away in his own pocketbook, and Mr. Mercer, to his credit, made no objection. "It is very likely nothing at all," Holmes said. "A man in deep water grasps at any rope thrown to him, and the men who throw such ropes are seldom worth the knowing. This friend did not kill your master, Mr. Mercer. He was 40 miles off, with clean hands and a clean conscience, which is the only sort of conscience his trade can afford. And yet, I find I do not care to leave it lying loose in a dead man's papers, where the next pair of hands might make some use of it. I shall keep it. One does not always know, when one stoops to pick a thing up, quite why one has done so. I have learned to trust the impulse and to wait for the reason to show itself." Finch had been watching the card pass into his pocketbook. "A bell, sir," she said, "that makes no sound at all." "No," said Holmes, and there was something in his face that I did not like. "This whole affair is full of things that make no sound, Constable. A whistle that no grown man can hear, a horn that calls all night and is never answered, and now a bell that only sits and waits and rings for no one." He rose. "I begin to think the loudest thing upon this coast is its silence." And he would say no more. We went down to our beds, and out beyond the harbor, the foghorn called once into the dark, and the dark, as it always did, gave it nothing back. Chapter 8. The Ledge. Holmes said nothing more of the bird that night, nor at breakfast the next morning, but I had been at his side too many years not to feel a thing working away in him, quiet and steady, the way the sea works at a rock. And when the next slack came round, he asked Coyle to carry us out to the tooth once more, and to bring with him a good length of rope. He told me his purpose as we crossed, low, so that the keeper at the oars should not catch it. "Consider it, Watson," he said, "a ring that the sea could not have taken, and yet it is gone, and a bird upon that rock that lifts from the water every bright thing it can reach, and bears it to one place, and one place alone, and broods upon it until it is paid. I have carried those two facts about with me since the day we first landed here, like the two halves of a thing that is asking to be joined. Today I mean to go up to the bird's shelf and learn whether they will join." "You think the creature has it," I said, "the ring?" "I think the sea has been blamed for a theft it never committed," he said, "and I think the thief has feathers. But thinking is not finding, and I have been wrong before today. We shall see what the rock has kept." Finch, who had caught the last of it, said nothing, but I saw her grip the gunwale a little tighter, as one does when a thing one has only dared to hope for begins to come true. The slack lay quiet on the water as it had before, and we came across without trouble. But the rock wore a harder face that day, for the wind had risen in the night, and the sea broke white about the foot of it, and the spray came over even at the turn of the tide. Coyle made the boat fast, and looked up at the tower with no great love in his eye. "The shelf is no place for a gentleman," he said. "It's a bad scramble, and a wet one, and Jack will not thank you for the visit." "Then Jack and I shall have our disagreement in private," said Holmes, and he took up the rope and went up. I will not pretend that I was easy in my mind watching him go. The way to the shelf was a broken stair of black rock, slick with weed and with the leavings of 100 years of birds, treacherous as wet glass. And the wind came round the tower and dragged at his coat as though it had a purpose in it. Below him the sea worked at the foot of the rock with a sound like a slow and patient hunger, a long suck and draw, that I have heard in my dreams since. Twice his foot went from under him on the weed, and twice he caught himself by his hands alone and hung a moment over the drop. And Finch at my side had her own hand pressed hard against her mouth, and did not seem to know that it was there. But Holmes had gone up worse places than that for far smaller reasons, and he came at the last to the ledge, a wide shelf of bird-whitened rock set just beneath the gallery of the great lamp. The bird, Jack, rose off it screaming and beat about his head with its black wings, fighting for its hoard as any creature will fight for the one small store of treasure that is wholly its own. Holmes put up an arm and bore the buffeting of it, and knelt down upon the streaming rock and set himself to search. We could not see from below what his hands were at. We could only see him bent over the rock, very still, the grey sky behind him, and the bird wheeling and crying above his head. Once he raised something to the light and turned it this way and that, and my heart came up into my throat. And then he set it down again, and I understood that it was not the thing he sought. A little after, he did the same once more, and once more laid it by. Glass, I supposed, or a coin gone green, or some poor button the sea had stripped from a drowned man years before, and the bird had fancied for its shine. For the shelf, I came to understand, was a whole small history of the creature's long thieving, the gleanings of 100 tides, and Holmes went through it as a scholar goes through a box of old deeds, patiently, missing nothing, while the wind dragged at him and the cries of the gulls came and went about the tower. I have known few longer quarters of an hour. The sea went in and out at the foot of the rock, in and out, with a long, sucking drag against the stone. And Finch called up once to ask what he had found, and the wind took her words away, and Holmes did not answer, or did not hear. Beside me, she had stopped pretending to be a constable about her duty, and had become only a young person watching, with her whole heart in it, for a thing she had been told could not be found, and had refused, in her own quiet way, to stop believing in. "He has it," she said once under her breath, not to me, not to anyone at all. "I know he has it." And then Holmes went still in another way altogether. It is a change I had seen in him perhaps a dozen times in all our years together, and never once grown used to. The change that came when the world at last gave up to him the thing he had asked of it. His hands stopped. His head came up. And then, slowly, he turned about where he knelt, high on that streaming black rock with the birds screaming over him and the grey sea heaving below. And he held something out toward us at the full stretch of his arm, pinched between his finger and his thumb. It was so small that for a moment, against all that wind and water, I could not make it out at all. It was a ring. Even at that distance, even in that poor grey light, I knew it for what it must be. A plain gold signet, worn thin with 30 years of a man's wearing, and upon its face, where a dead man and his father before him had pressed it down into the sealing wax, the small, worn shape of some device that I was too far off to read. Holmes did not cry out in his triumph. He was never a man who did. He looked at that little circle of gold a long moment, up there in the wind, as though the finding of it grieved him quite as much as it answered him. And then he looked down at me, and his voice came clear and low beneath all the great noise of the sea. "Watson," he said, "the ring." Chapter 9. A Question of Cold Water. We came off that rock with the ring in Holmes's pocket and a silence between us that none of us cared to break. It was not until we were back in the small parlor at the inn, with the door shut and the lamp lit and the sea muttering away beyond the dark window, that he set the little thing on the table between us and asked the question that had been waiting all afternoon to be asked. "There it is, then," he said. "Found at the bottom of a pool the sea was blamed for hiding it in. And it answers one thing only to raise another. You heard Mrs. Selby in Baker Street. Her brother had worn that ring from a boy until the finger had grown about it. Coyle's pool spoiled his keys and washed his pockets clean, and could not so much as stir it. And yet here it lies, off the hand it could not leave. A ring that could not come off has come off, Watson. I should very much like to know by what road." "It is the cold water, I believe," I said, for I had been turning it over the whole way back. The cold and the weight he had lost. You will recall the innkeeper's evidence that the gentleman had fallen away to half himself in his trouble, and the tailor's bill among his papers, not a month old, for the taking in of 2 of his coats. A man who sheds a stone and more in a few weeks of worry sheds it from his hands as from all the rest of him. The flesh of the finger wastes with the man. A ring that has gripped a full hand for 30 years will turn loose upon a thin one. "And the cold?" said Holmes. He was watching me with that close attention he gives to a thing he has reasoned already and wishes to hear reasoned again. "The cold draws the flesh tighter yet," I said. "Any man who has bathed in a winter sea knows it, how the hands shrink and the fingers narrow and wrinkle and lose their hold on things. I have drawn drowned men from cold water, Holmes, and I have seen rings turn upon their fingers like loose hoops. Now take a man already wasted by his grief, and put him into cold sea water, and let him fight in it for his life. A ring already loose will work to the knuckle and over it, and be gone into the dark, and the poor fellow will never feel it leave him. It would scarcely need the struggle. Such a hand would let it slip of its own weight once the cold had done its work." Finch had been very still, listening. "Then it was no thief, sir," she said quietly. "Nobody took it from him." "Nobody took it from him," said Holmes. "That was the first road I closed. There is no profit in a worn family ring that 100 men could swear to, and no thief carries off a thing he can never sell and leaves the gold in his pockets behind." He took up the ring and turned it slowly in the lamplight. "No, the doctor has the right of it." The ring did not leave that hand upon dry land by a thief or by the dead man's own choosing. It left his hand in the water, It came off in the cold sea while he drowned, and it went down to the floor of the pool. And there it lay until a bird that loves a shining thing went down at the turn of the tide and brought it up for its supper. There is no other way under heaven that it could be where I found it this afternoon." He set the ring down upon the table, very gently, between the three of us. "And that, Watson, is a far greater thing than the little circle of it would suggest. For it does not tell us only how the ring came into the water." He paused, and the sea was loud in the pause. "It tells us when." I did not follow him. "When?" "That bird does not fish in the dark," he said, "and it does not fish the running tide. It goes down for what shines only at the slack of the water, and only by the light of day. And it is on its shelf with its head beneath its wing before the dusk comes down. Coyle told us so himself, with his own mouth, and whatever else the keeper may be, he is no liar. The bird took that ring from the water. Therefore the ring was in the water at the slack, and in the daylight, for there is no other hour the bird would have gone down for it." He stopped. I waited for the rest. It did not come. He was looking at the ring, but he was not seeing it any more. I have watched my friend bring 100 tangled things to their solution, and I knew the look of the last piece sliding home. But I had rarely in all those years seen the knowledge cost him anything, and it was plainly costing him now. The color had gone a little from his face. His mouth had set into a hard line, and he sat so still and so long that Finch turned and looked at me in something close to fright. "Holmes," I said, "what is it? You have it. I can see in your face that you have it." "I have it," he said. "If I am honest with you, Watson, I have had the shape of it since I was up on that rock with the wind in my ears, and I have spent the whole afternoon since turning my back upon it like a coward, because I did not wish it to be true." He drew a long breath and let it go. "It is a very small step, you see, from knowing the hour the ring went into the water to knowing who was standing beside that pool when it did. A short step and a plain one. I could take it now and speak a name, and I am as certain of that name as I have been certain of anything in this profession of mine." "Then who?" said Finch, leaning forward. "Sir, who?" "No," said Holmes, and he laid his hand flat over the little ring, as though to keep it from her, or from himself. "Not yet, Constable. I will not put a rope about a man's neck for a clever trick with a bird until I know what drove him to need one. There is a thing behind this, a reason behind the hour and the water and the poor frightened creature on its rock, and I do not yet understand it. And a name spoken too soon is the hardest thing in the world to call back." He rose and went to the dark window and stood looking out at nothing, with the sea working away below in the night. "We will have the motive first, and then, God help us all, we will have the man." Chapter 10. London Confirms. Holmes would not stir from the coast, though I half expected him to take the next train up to town. The thing he wanted, he said, was not in London. The men who could find it for him were. So for the better part of 2 days, he sat in the little parlor and made the wires hum between Porthcombe and the city, and the boy from the post office came up the hill so often that the landlord set out a chair for him by the door. Cobb's answers came first, in the short and ungenerous style of a man who pays for his words by the dozen. Marbury was finished as a suspect before he had ever rightly begun. 3 separate men of standing would swear they had dined in his company in London on the very evening Sir Edmund went into the sea, and a 4th had sat at his elbow at the public dinner while he stood and made his bitter speech against the dead. He had not been a day out of the city for a fortnight on either side of it. "So much for the loud man," said Holmes when I had read it to him. "He cursed his enemy before the whole city, and an enemy you curse before the whole city is an enemy you have not the least intention of drowning. The newspapers will be sorry. They had their villain ready chosen, and a fine, respectable villain he made." He folded the wire away. "Now for the quiet one, and the harder question. Not who, Watson, for I have known the who since I came down off that rock with the ring in my hand. But why a gentle and a faithful man should bring himself to do a terrible thing?" The answer, when it came not out of London at all, but out of the dead man's own papers, which we had carried back to the inn from Mr. Mercer's keeping, and which Holmes now went through a second time with a colder and a closer eye than before. It was the draft of the speech that did it, the speech of his defense that Sir Edmund had been writing and striking out and writing over again against the day the question should be put to him in the House. I had glanced at it once and seen only the wreckage of a frightened man. Holmes read it as a confession. For it was not, at the bottom of it, a defense at all. It was an accusation. Sir Edmund had not meant to stand up and deny that the public money was gone. He had meant to lay the loss of it at the door of another. The funds, he would tell the House, had passed in part through the hands of a person he had trusted, a person he had taken into the confidence of his affairs out of pure charity, and that person had played him false and bled the accounts and left an honest servant of the public to carry the shame of a theft that was not his. "There is a particular cruelty in it," Holmes said, very low, "that I did not see at the first reading. The person he means to ruin was no stranger to him, brought in off the street. He took pains to write that she had been placed in his confidence by another as a kindness, and had repaid the kindness with theft. Some good soul, Watson, found this person an honest position with a great man, and the great man means to make of that very position the rope to hang her with." "She," I said. "It is a woman, then?" "It is a woman," said Holmes, "and a woman alone, with no name and no money to set against a member of Parliament, branded a thief in every newspaper in the land by the man she served and trusted. She would be finished as surely as if he had drowned her himself. No one would take her part. No one would even hear her. That is what he had planned, in this room, in his own neat hand, while a faithful man kept his fire alight and sent down for his linen and watched the birdfish below the rock." He had found the place he wanted. For the lie to do its work, the name must be in it, and named before the press. And he has set it down here, and crossed it out, and set it down again, a dozen times over, as a man does who is steeling himself to a thing he knows in his heart to be wicked. He laid the page flat beneath the lamp, and turned it so that Finch and I might see, and put his finger under the words that the dead man had written, and struck through, and written once more. The name was Miss Edith Mercer. For a long moment, none of us said anything at all, and the only sound in the room was the sea, far down below the window, going on as it had always gone on. It was Finch who broke it. Her notebook lay open on her knee, and her pencil had stopped upon the page, and she was looking at the name on the table as though it might rise up and strike her. "Mercer," she said. "Sir, the same name, the secretary." She raised her head, and her young face had gone quite white. "It is his sister. It must be his sister. The man we sat with last night. The man who asked the doctor so soft whether his master had felt any pain. The man who said he could not order his master about, however dearly he loved him. Her voice was not quite steady now. And all the while that master was writing this. He was going to stand up before all England and call Mr. Mercer's own sister a thief, and ruin her, and never lose a night's sleep over it so long as it saved his name. And Mr. Mercer found it. Mr. Mercer found it, said Holmes. He kept his master's papers. He wrote his master's letters. There is not a page in that case his eyes had not been over 100 times. Of course he found it. He had himself, I do not doubt, secured his sister her place with Sir Edmund in the first of it, thinking he did her a great good turn, setting her among honest people, under the wing of a rising man. And then, going through his master's papers one grey afternoon, as he had gone through them for years, he came upon this. He read what was to be done to her, and he learned, all in a moment, exactly what the master he had given his life to was made of. Holmes sat back and passed a hand slowly across his eyes, and there was no triumph anywhere in him, only a great and settled weariness. I came down to this coast, he said, to a clever little puzzle about a bird and a tide, and I have found a tragedy at the end of it. The two are not always the same thing, Watson, and I had let myself forget that they are not. A man gave the whole of his life to a master and asked nothing back, and stood by him in his ruin. And his reward was to discover that the master meant to buy his own safety with the good name of the one creature on this earth the servant loved. He looked at the little ring, still lying where he had set it down. I almost wish I had left that thing at the bottom of the sea. None of us answered him. Outside, the lamp upon the rock had begun its slow turning in the dark, throwing its pale arm out across the water and drawing it back again, throwing it out and drawing it back, warning the living off the stones that had taken Edmund Vane. And somewhere below it, on its cold shelf, the bird that had told us the whole of it slept with its head beneath its wing and knew nothing of any of it at all. Chapter 11. The Keeper Cleared. Holmes did not sleep that night, I think, for I heard him at the window long after I had given up the attempt myself. In the morning, he was abroad before any of us, and he asked the landlord to send word out to the rock that he wished Coyle ashore. The keeper came in on the morning slack, with the birdjack riding on the prow of the boat, as though it owned a vessel, and he climbed the steps to the quay with the wary, braced look of a man who has been sent for by his betters once too often, and expects no good to come of it. Holmes met him in the cold morning light, with Finch and myself a pace behind. And he did a thing I had not looked for. He took off his hat to the keeper. "Mr. Coyle," he said, "I have brought you ashore to tell you before these witnesses that you are a wronged man, and that I am one of those who wronged you. When I first came down to this coast, I half believed, as half your village believes, that there was something dark in you and in your bird. I was a fool for it. You lit your lamp that night to the very minute, with an honest man on the beach to swear to it, and while you stood at the top of your tower, keeping other men off the rocks, the thing that was done here was done a long way below you and out of your sight, and you knew nothing of it. There is no stain upon you, and I will see that the people who have whispered otherwise hear so from my own mouth before I leave this place." The keeper looked at him a long moment, and something worked in that hard, weathered face, and I understood that the man had carried the village's suspicion a great deal more heavily than his pride had ever let him show. He did not thank Holmes. I do not think he had the words ready for it. But he put out his rough hand and Holmes took it, and that was thanks enough between two such men. "They've said it of me 30 year," Coyle said at last gruffly. "Lonely men and their birds. I stopped minding it, or told myself I had." He looked down at Jack, who had hopped onto a bollard and was preening in the thin sun. "He's no devil. He's the best company I've had on that rock, and the truest of it, and I'll not have him spoke ill of." "He shall not be spoken ill of by me," said Holmes. "Quite the reverse. For your bird, Mr. Coyle, is the one honest witness this whole sad business has, and I mean to give him his due." He turned to Finch, who had her notebook out, as she always did when she felt that a thing was about to be made plain. "The village had it exactly backwards, Constable. They feared the creature as a kind of weapon. A trained thing set on to do a man harm. It was nothing of the sort. It harmed no one, and could harm no one. But it watched. It went about its own small business upon that rock, at its own fixed hours, on the day a man died there, precisely as it had done every day of its life before. And in the going about of that business, it took up and carried home and kept the one thing that tells us the truth of how he died. The bird is not the murderer's tool, Watson. The bird is the witness for the dead." "Then read me its testimony, sir," said Finch, half in earnest and half, I believe, only to hear him give it. "From the start." "Gladly," said Holmes. "And mark it well, Constable, for there is no trick in any part of it, and not a grain of knowledge in it that you do not already have for yourself. You have stood on that rock and heard every word of it, exactly as I have." He held up a finger. "First, the keeper's bird fishes only at the slack of the tide, and only by the light of day, and it is asleep upon its shelf before the dusk comes down. It will not dive in the running water, and it cannot see to dive in the dark. Coyle has told us so, and you have watched the truth of it with your own eyes. Second," a second finger, "upon the day that Sir Edmund died, that bird brought up off the floor of the pool his father's signet ring. We hold the ring. There is no disputing it. The ring was in the water, and the bird went down and fetched it, as it fetches up every bright thing the sea will offer it. Third, a third finger, and the ring did not leave his hand on dry land. It came off in the water while he drowned, slipping from a finger that grief had wasted and the cold had narrowed. The doctor here will swear to the how of that, and I to the why. The ring went into the sea at the very instant the man went under it." He lowered his hand. "Now set the three together, Constable, as you would set 3 stones into a wall, and see what they raise up. The ring went into the water at the moment of the drowning. The bird took the ring out of the water, and the bird goes down into the water for such things at 1 hour, and 1 hour only, in all the turning of the day, at the slack, by daylight, never in the dark, and never at the run of the tide." He paused, and the gulls cried over the quay, and the sea moved against the harbour wall below us. "The whole of the coroner's account hangs upon the man having died at dusk. But the bird tells us he cannot have died at dusk, for the ring was in the water in good time for the bird to fetch it up, and the bird was on its shelf and fast asleep long before the dusk ever came. He did not die in the dark, Watson, with no living soul to see. He died in the broad light of day, at the turn of the tide. He died, therefore, not at the hour they have all sworn to, but hours before it, while there was yet one other person standing on that rock at his side." There were but 2 slacks of the tide in the daylight of that day, he went on, more quietly now. The forenoon turn, when 3 men crossed to the rock together and sat to their dinner, and a doomed man was for 1 half-hour almost happy. And the afternoon turn, when one of those 3 climbed down into the boat and crossed back to the shore alone. The bird went down to the water with that ring but once. We have only to ask ourselves at which of those 2 turns it did so. Answer me that, Constable, and you have answered the whole of it. You will know the hour, and knowing the hour, you will know, past any further asking, the name of the man who stood beside Sir Edmund Vane when the cold sea closed over his head. And there, with the gulls wheeling above us, and the slack already beginning to fail, and the boat waiting to carry us out for the last time, I shall leave you a moment where Holmes left the 3 of us standing. For we had, every one of us, precisely what he had. Every word of it, every tide, every fixed and patient habit of that bird. The whole of it lay open before us, and the answer lay open in it, for any soul who cared to reach in and take it up. The bird had gone down to the water but once that day. We had only to ask when. Chapter 12. The Solution. It was Coyle himself who gave us the hour there on the quay, and he gave it without in the least understanding what he gave. "Mr. Coyle," said Holmes, turning to the keeper, "on the day Sir Edmund died, did your bird bring you up anything from the water? A bright thing, of the kind he favours?" The keeper frowned, casting his mind back. "Aye, now you put it to me. That very afternoon. He come up to his shelf with something shining, after the young gentleman's boat had pulled off for the shore, and made his usual fuss till I'd paid him his herring for it. I took it for a scrap of glass, the way I always do. I never looked at it close." His weathered face changed slowly as the meaning of his own words came home to him. That afternoon. Hours afore he was ever found. Hours afore he was meant to have died at all. "Hours before," said Holmes quietly. "Thank you, Mr. Coyle. You have just told me a truth that 3 weeks of inquest could not. Your bird took that ring out of the pool in the broad afternoon with the sun still up and Mr. Mercer's boat not yet halfway to the shore. And a ring does not go into the sea before the hand that wears it. Sir Edmund Vane was already dead in that water by the middle of the afternoon, Constable. He did not die at dusk. He had been dead for hours by dusk. And there was one man upon that rock, and one only, to do it." We did not go out to the rock again. We went instead to the inn, and up the narrow stair to the small parlour, where Mr. Mercer sat at the window with his master's papers squared neatly before him, doing, even now, the dead man's work. He rose when we came in, as he had risen the first time, and he looked from Holmes's face to mine and to Finch's, and I think he knew, before a word was spoken, that the long quiet of his waiting was over. Holmes did not sit. He stood in the middle of that small room, and he was very gentle, which was the most terrible thing about it. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "I know how Sir Edmund died, and I know the hour of it, and I know whose hand it was. I am going to tell it to you, not because you do not know it better than I, but because you have carried it alone for 3 weeks, and I think you are very tired." Mercer said nothing. "You took him out to the rock that morning, the 2 of you, and you sat with the keeper, and for 1 half-hour the man you served was almost at peace. And then the afternoon turn came, the slack of the tide, the only hour a boat can cross. You went down to the pool with him to watch the bird a last time, perhaps. And there, in 3 feet of cold water, while the keeper was about his lamp at the top of his tower with his back to you both, you put your hands upon him, and you held him under until it was done. Mercer did not move and did not speak, and his stillness was its own answer. It need not have been a cruel thing, Holmes went on, more gently still. A wasted man in cold water does not struggle long. And as he went down, his ring, loose upon a finger that grief had thinned, slipped from his hand into the pool. And you never saw it go, and you could not have known what it would do. For the keeper's bird was below you in the same slack water, fishing, as it fishes every day at the turn. It found the bright ring on the floor of the pool and carried it up to its shelf. And that small theft has undone you as surely as any confession ever signed. You crossed back to the shore alone. You put it about that you had left him living. The tide rose and shut off the rock and gave you the dusk to hide the hour in. It was very well done. It would have stood against any man in England, but the one who thought to ask a bird what it had seen. For a long moment, Mr. Mercer said nothing at all. And then he sat down slowly in the chair by the window, as a man sits when his legs will no longer hold him. And he put his face into his hands, and when he lowered them again, he was not weeping, but he had the look of one who has set down a great weight and finds he can scarcely stand without it. Yes, he said, every word of it is true. I have waited 3 weeks for someone to come and say it to me, Mr. Holmes, and I find I am glad it is you, and not a stupid man. He drew a breath. You will want to know why. You are the sort of man who would want to know why. He told us then in that quiet, careful voice, and I have never sat through anything harder in my life. He had a sister, Edith, younger than himself and gentler, and alone in the world but for him, their parents being long dead. She had no fortune, and a woman without a fortune must make her own way or be a burden, and Edith was too proud to be a burden to anyone. So when Sir Edmund, years before, had wanted an honest hand to keep his private accounts, Mercer had got the place for his sister, and believed he had done her the greatest of kindnesses, setting her under the roof of a rising and respectable man. She kept his books faithfully for 3 years, Mercer said, and was happy in it, and never took so much as a shilling that was not her own. And then his money troubles came on him, and he cast about for a way out. And one afternoon, going through his papers, as I have done all my life, I found the way he had chosen. His careful voice did not rise, but something dreadful came into it. He meant to give them Edith. He meant to stand up in the house and weep, and tell them the public money had been stolen by a clerk he had charitably taken in, a Miss Mercer, that he was the victim of her wickedness. He had the figures half forged already. She would have hanged Mr. Holmes, or as near to it as makes no difference. A woman, alone, branded a thief by a member of Parliament, with no one to believe her, and no one even troubling to listen. And I had put her there. I had handed her to him. I tried every other road first, he said. I begged him. I offered him my own savings, such as they were, to cover what he swore was gone. I told him I would go to the newspapers myself with the truth of it. He laughed at me. He told me I was nothing, and Edith was nothing, and that a great man does not drown for the sake of a clerk and her brother. He used that very word, drown. He told me he would not drown for her. Mercer looked up, and his eyes were dry and very clear. And I thought, going home that night, then you shall. If one of us must go into the water to save her, then it shall be you, and not my sister, and not her good name. And the next day I took him out to the rock, and I did the thing you have described. And I was not sorry then, and God forgive me, I am not altogether sorry now. There was a long silence in that small room, and the sea filled it, as the sea had filled every silence of that strange week. Finch had stopped writing long before. Her eyes had filled, and she did not trouble to hide it, and I did not think the less of her for it. Holmes was quiet a great while. When he spoke at last, it was not as a man delivering a sentence, but as one thinking aloud and choosing his road as he went. "You have killed a man, Mr. Mercer," he said, "and the law of England has but one answer to that, and it is a hard one. And if I lay what I know before the proper people, that answer will be given. There is no doubt of the proof. The ring alone would do it." He paced to the window and back. "But I am not the proper people. I am a private man, with no oath upon me, and the law has never once asked my leave before it hanged a fellow. I find this morning that I am in no hurry to do its work for it. Consider only what the truth would cost, were I fool enough to spend it. To hang you, I must tell the world why. And to tell them why, I must tell them of your sister, and of what was planned for her, and her name would be in every newspaper from here to the Tweed, exactly as he intended it to be. I should ruin Edith Mercer to avenge the man who tried to ruin her first. There is no justice in that. There is only a second cruelty laid upon the first." He looked at Mercer. "And there is the dead man's own sister to think of. A good woman who came to me in honest grief and asked me one thing, not vengeance, only that I clear her brother of the shame of having died by his own hand. That much I can give her, and give her truthfully, for he did not die by his own hand. He was murdered. I need tell her nothing more than that." "You would let me go," said Mercer, and there was wonder in it, and something close to grief, as though he had wanted the ending the law would have given him. "I would have you go," said Holmes, "but not to nothing, and not to do this a second time, for a man who has killed once may find it the easier after, and I will not have that upon my account. You will leave England, you and your sister both, and soon. There are countries enough where a careful and a faithful man may begin again, and where no one knows your name or hers. You will take her there, and you will keep her safe, which is the one thing in this world you have ever truly wished to do. And you will live with what you did every day of your life, which is a longer sentence than any judge would pass, and a juster one. That is my price. I keep your secret, you keep her, and bear the weight of it." Mercer was a long time in answering. "I do not deserve it," he said at last. "No," said Holmes. "Very few of the things that befall us are deserved, the good or the bad alike. Take your sister out of this country, Mr. Mercer, and make of the rest of your days something she would be proud of, if she knew the whole of it, which she never must. That is the only penance I will set upon you." We left him there, in the small room above the sea, with his master's papers still squared upon the table before him. He would do the dead man's work to the very end of it, I thought, and then he would go, and we should never hear of him again. And we never did. Holmes was silent on the long climb back up the cliff, and it was not until we stood at the top, with the whole grey sweep of it below us, the rock, the tower, the white water at its foot, that he said the only other thing he said upon the matter that day. "There is an irony in it, Watson, that I cannot let alone. That man down there," he did not mean Mercer, "spent the last of his life and his honor buying silence. He paid a nameless creature to make his troubles disappear without a sound. He chose a lonely rock at the edge of the world where no voice would carry and no one would hear. He arranged the very quietest death for his good name that money could buy. And in the end, he was dragged up into the light, and the truth of him with it, by the one thing on all that silent coast he never once thought to silence. A bird that took a shining thing out of the sea because it could not help itself." He turned for the road. "He stopped every mouth he could find, Watson. He never thought to stop the birds." We went down and packed our bags, and in the morning we took the train back up to London, the three of us, and the bird stayed on its rock, where it stays, I have no doubt, to this day. It never knew what it had done. I have always been glad of that. Chapter 13. A Word Kept Back. We came back to Baker Street in the last grey days of January, and for a little while Holmes was poor company, as he always was when a case had cost him more than it had pleased him. He took out neither his violin, nor his papers, nor any of his usual comforts. He sat by the window and watched the wet street below, and I left him to it, for I have learned that there are silences a friend does best not to fill. Mrs. Selby came to us once more, on a hard, bright morning at the month's end, and Holmes received her with a gentleness I had rarely seen in him. He told her the one thing she had crossed half of England to hear, and he told her nothing beyond it. Her brother had not died by his own hand. He had been murdered, and there was proof of it, and she might let go the doubt she had buried him under, for it had never had any truth in it. And then he gave her back her father's ring. She wept then, but gently, and not in the worst of ways. And when she had recovered herself, she asked me the question I had been dreading, which was, who had done it, and why? Holmes took her hand before I could speak. "I am going to ask you to let that lie, Mrs. Selby," he said. "Not because I do not know it, because I do. The man is beyond the reach of any court of yours or mine, and the reasons behind it would bring you only a deeper grief than the one you carry now, and would do a great harm to an innocent person who has suffered more than enough. You came to me to lift a shadow from your brother's name, and that I have done. Be content with it. There are doors in this world that are kinder left shut, and this, I do assure you, is one of them." She looked at him a long while, and I believe she understood a good deal more than he had said, the way the bereaved so often do, and she did not ask again. And that is why this case has never been told until now, and why I held it back through all the years when I was setting down so many lesser ones. For the truth of it could not be told without telling the whole, and the whole could not be told without working the very harm that a quiet man had given everything he had to prevent. To clear Sir Edmund Vane of the manner of his death, I must have blackened him for the manner of his life, and dragged a blameless woman's name through the same mud he had meant to throw at her himself. I would not do it then. I have not done it until now, when all of them are long past any hurt that I could do them, and the doors that were kinder shut may at last be opened, a little and gently, to the air. I think of the bird sometimes, on its cold rock, keeping its small fixed hours over an empty pool. It told the truth, because it could do nothing else, and it never knew the truth it told, nor the weight of it, nor what came of it. There are days I think it had the better part. As for Constable Finch, she went back to the yard a quieter and a graver young woman than she had left it, and I do not believe she has ever forgotten that small room above the sea. She wrote to me a year or two after to say that she had been made a sergeant, which did not surprise me in the smallest degree, and to ask whether I thought she had done right to hold her tongue. I wrote back that I did not know what was right, but that I knew what was kind, and that the two are not so often the same as we should wish them to be, and that she had chosen the kind. I never learned whether my answer satisfied her. I rather hope that it did not. The best of them are never quite satisfied. There is one thing more, and then I shall close the box upon it. On the evening we came home, tired and out of sorts, Holmes took from his pocketbook the small plain card with the little bell pressed into the heart of it, the one he had lifted from a dead man's papers and could not say why he kept. He sat with it a long time in the lamplight, turning it slowly in his fingers, saying nothing at all. I asked him in the end whether he meant to do anything with it. "Not yet," he said. "There is nothing to be done with it yet. A man who sells silence to the desperate and signs his work with a little bell is not a man one runs to ground in a single afternoon. But I have his card now, Watson, and one day, I think, he will reach a hand too far, as his sort always do in the end. And on that day, I should like to have it by me." He rose and crossed to the shelf where he kept the great commonplace books in which he filed away the whole untidy world, and he laid the little card inside one of them, under the letter B, and shut the cover upon it. He kept the card. I did not understand why then.
Hey, thanks for staying with me to the very end of that one. I'll be honest with you, of all the cases in the box, this is one I keep coming back to. Mercer wasn't a villain. He found out whether his master meant to do to his own sister, and he stopped it the only way he had lived. I still don't know if Holmes was right to let him walk away. Tell me what you would have done. I read every comment. And keep that little card with the bell in the back of your mind. It matters more than it looks. There is a great deal more in this dispatch box. And which file I open next is partly up to you. So tell me, where do we go? Until then, mind the phone on your way out.